Hello, I'm Ramon. Welcome to the channel. I'm starting a new series or playlist here on YouTube called Quick Tips. And I've been told that I have more tricks than a Vegas hooker. And it's true. I do have a ton of woodworking tips and tricks. You can check out my two ebooks, volumes 1 and 2, Tricks of the Trade. Well, this is more of that. So let's just dive in, yeah?
All right, so here I want to bring attention to a feature of a chop saw or miter saw. More specifically, a characteristic of how they make a cut. They essentially make a plunge cut. If you had a flat board, you're plunge cutting right through the middle of it, right? So it's a bit of a challenge for the saw blade to engage the work, which is why sliding miter saws were developed. So for instance here, as I'm cutting this piece of aluminum, I turn it upside down and the saw blade engages the edges, kind of similar to how a table saw would cut the edge of a board. Just makes it a lot easier to cut and makes a clean cut. Makes sense, yeah? Sometimes we need to make the grain parallel to the edge of a board and it looks better oftentimes, right? And here's an easy way to do it. I just use double stick tape, straight edge, run that against the fence, and boom, that looks a lot better.
A scribe or a compass in the workshop can be a huge time saver. And so what I've got here, I've got some legs. This goes to a footboard, headboard and a footboard. And I'm gonna have some rails coming across here. This is just fall off, right? And I've got the location marked, but I need centers of this, and I also need center this way, and I'm gonna need center of my pieces as well, so I can make all these mortise and tenons at the panel router. Lots of ways to find centers of that, but here's how I do it. Simple scribe, and this is some fall off, same size material. And so what I can do is just get down here at eye level to the piece, and I'm just going to shoot for somewhere in the center. I just want to get close. Of course, being exact would be good, but make one mark, flip it over, do it again. You can see there's space in between. And I can just shoot for center of that, split the difference. I'm gonna put a small mark here, try that again, flip it over. And that looks pretty good. So now I know that that is dead on center, right? So I can mark my pieces. And this is for mica table. I know it's flat. Just want to make sure that there's nothing underneath it. I'll push down on this just in case there's any warp in the table, or maybe the leg has bowed a little bit. Push it down. You can see a little bit of a gap there, so I can bring it closer to the edge here. And that's the center in that direction. That's awesome, right? Same thing with this one. This will be my rail. I also need a center mark here. So when I go to the panel router, since it works off the center marks, at least for the first ones, you can set stops after that. I'm gonna do the same thing. I'll just put a small mark here, flip it over. Sometimes I get lucky, it's dead center. So we just put a mark, boom. So that's my center in between these two marks. For this direction, I also need this center. So what I can do is, utilizing this compass, and I can just strike an arc. I just need to be a little bit over half. This is just simple geometry, right? Do that again, strike an arc. And where those radiuses intersect is where dead center is. Boom. So that's center. How fantastic is that? Lots of ways to do things, yeah? Hey, maybe this is well known. I saw somebody kind of struggling the other day on Instagram, trying to lay some parts out. So what I have here are 6 components, and they are going to be spaced equally in this long piece, kind of a ladder formation, right? So I can just gather these all up, put them flush with the end. And like I said, this may be well known, but maybe it'll help somebody out there. And I've got those flush at the end. I can see what this difference is. And it is 66 1/4. 66.25. So I know that I will have, let me just separate these a little bit. I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spaces, right? So I can simply take
old iPhone 6. Let's see. Where's my calculator? There it is.
66.25 divided by 5 equals 13 1/4. Pretty simple, right? So I can just take a spacer to lay those all out, and boom, they'll come out exact. Regardless of what these pieces are, I mean, if you have some crazy fraction, super easy to figure. Yeah? So a question that I get asked occasionally is, when should I use a domino versus a biscuit? Well, biscuits are less expensive, right? And a lot of times you don't really need something crazy strong. You just need to connect a couple of boards. I like screwing my biscuit joiner down, something like this, and I should put this over there where the clamp is. But anyway, with it down, I'm using the base as a reference so that I can easily make my plunge. So I'm connecting this component to these, and yeah, I could put a couple of 8mm dominoes in there, and that would be very strong, but I really don't need the strength. I just need this to be connected, and I'll show you what it's for here in a bit. But I decided might as well just use biscuit. If I use dominoes, it would take 24 of them, and they're really not that expensive, I guess, but in the long run, and you can even make your own, of course, but biscuits are going to be way less expensive. So that's the route I decided to use. A lot of choices, and I'll quit talking now because I'm just rambling.
So of course, to start, I find center for the first one and then set up a stop block. As I mentioned earlier, securing the joiner down to this sandpaper board works extremely well. As I make these plunge cuts in all of the components, they stay put with very little effort. This shop-made belt sander dock has been a fantastic addition to my shop. I use it all the time. I do have a large edge sander, but with a belt sander, I have a lot of different grits and they're easy to change out. I have this little accessory that I can make 90-degree edges, right? And you can see the top plate of the dock is adjustable, so, well, to ensure perpendicular or 90 degrees, the edges come out perfect. And then I made this additional piece, and with it I can make chamfers quickly. Here you can see this small adjustment screw, and that'll fine-tune the size of the chamfer. And I first made this to quickly make chamfers on these marble stands for my son Derek. He makes these incredibly beautiful marbles completely by hand and sells them by the hundreds. So yeah, of course it works great for aluminum as well. Here I'm making some Panther router stop blocks or some K3 hammer blocks. Love, love, love this thing. Extremely effective.
Well, I'm not sure whether to put this under routers or sanders, but maybe both. Anyway, I made this frame. It's a simple frame. It's a support for a bed I'm working on. When should you use a chamfer bit versus a roundover bit? Well, if it's not decorative and it doesn't matter, then I always choose a roundover bit, primarily because it's a lot easier to sand a roundover profile versus a chamfer or a 45-degree bevel that needs to retain crisp corners. With a round over, it's a lot easier to sand, right? So that's what I chose to do. This is just a small 1/8 inch round over. And I always, if I have something to route like this, I'll just take it outside. It makes way less mess. Incidentally, when you're sanding something like this, I see a lot of people using a sander and they sand and they progressively work down the profile. Well, that's okay, but under magnification, or if it really counted and you took that to a strong raking light, you would see facets. So a better way to do it is to, well, let me just show you.
This may be obvious already, but I see a lot of people doing it the other way, and this way works much, much better.
That'll get more of a consistent round over blend. Yeah. So at this end of the K3, originally there was 2 screws holding this plate on. I removed those 2 screws, used 2 different screws to attach this plate, like a drawer front, to this drawer. So now I have my wrenches in here. I keep my commonly used 23 gauge pins in here. Here are the original screws to this plate, with the exception of these 2 new holes that I drilled. One could put this back if they ever needed to, but this is actually super handy. I put a screw here to act as a stop so that can't come out too far. So yeah, got to get creative in small workspaces, right? Yeah, man, I love it. So I'm finished sanding some panels, getting ready to fit them to some frames. And I noticed a small scratch right there. It might not show up on camera. It's pretty small, but you know, I could sand on it and get it out, or I can just use a scraper. Now, it's probably well known that when you use a scraper, you're literally creating a belly, a bow, a dip. And depending on how much you bend it, you know, depends on how deep that dip is. And it's really not very much. I mean, you can go overboard and create a hollow for sure, but really we can use that to our advantage. As far as this scratch here, I should be able to get that out pretty quickly. This is starting to make sawdust. I need to turn a hook, but that scratch is gone. Just like that. Now I can come back with my 180 and blend everything, yeah? So I wanted to share something with you. So this probably won't make a lot of sense, but this is a headboard. This is the front. And one little area here is going to show kind of like a toe kick area, and it would just produce this hole. I want to fill that. So I just made this. This is a Baltic birch with some Wenge veneer. And you can see I've created this dado here and here. And this is the curve of the dado blade, right? So I just produced this thing. We used to call this a relish. It's sometimes referred to as a haunch. Same with this situation here. There's some material there. Rather than clearing that out and squaring that all up, which doesn't really do you any good, you can just remove that. And now this will seat in there like that. This will all get glued in place when all the joinery happens, when all the joinery gets glued. Of course, this will get clamped this direction as well, and it'll actually add a little bit of support or bracing at this corner. Not that it needs it, but yeah, and like I said, only about this much, 1.5 inches of this is going to show here in the front. So here at the table saw, I'm getting ready to cut these chamfers. So this is a top rail to a headboard and a footboard. This would be the legs, right? So it'll look something like that, and it has this 26-degree angle. So which angles would I cut first? Well, it makes sense to me to cross-cut the ends first, right? If I was to, here at the table saw, make those cuts, all the way down and then cut this end angle, well, more than likely one of these corners is going to chip out, the one in the back, right? So it makes sense to do that one first. Any little bit of tear out or blowout will get cut by the subsequent cuts here and here. Makes sense, yeah? It all adds up. So I just got done with a fairly large glue up, and something that I wanted to share with you. I've got these magnetic pads. They're just a piece of Baltic birch with some leather and a couple of magnets. And the reason I put 2 magnets is because sometimes I don't want the cowl exactly centered on there. I want to put it to one edge. And the reason I want to do that at times is because I can put a little bit better focus to this component, which is off, in the center of this, and I can't quite reach it because this clamp's in the way. And so rather than just putting that like that, which would actually put pressure here and cause that to twist, I can bring that down as far as I can, and that's going to focus that pressure, wow, a lot better on that style there. And that tightened up just right. So I actually moved those clamps to underneath where I could get better pressure point right in the middle where I needed it. And I was able to move this long bar here, and case in point, this pad's dropped down to where, contacting in the center here to correspond with this mortise and tenon on the end of this rail. In addition, this is a really long clamp. This is spanning about, 80 inches or something. This side was pretty tight, but I needed that side to tighten. So that's where I put the screw part of the clamp. So it does make a difference when you're clamping something to put this part of the clamp where you need the most pressure or to draw a gap. So I'm cutting some small pieces of plywood. This is actually shop-made plywood. I need to cut just a little bit off this. It's cutting cross grain. So an easy trick you could do, I have a scoring blade on my other saw, but not everybody has a slider. So here's what you can do. I'm gonna add 1 layer of tape to my fence. These are small pieces, so right in there should be plenty good. Right? I've already got my distance set. I'm gonna drop the blade down to just make a scoring cut somewhere in there. Let's make a cut.
This is an excellent trick that I will use often. Rather than using the scoring blade on my bigger saw, it's just quick and easy to set up and very accurate. So we make the cut with the tape on the fence, right? And then we can remove the tape, thusly shifting that board over about 0.4 of an inch. That's cool, yeah? Now we can raise the blade up and cut like normal. And yeah, you're creating a tiny little offset. You can barely see it. And you might not even be able to see it, but that slight shift will keep those fibers from chipping on the bottom side.
These actually go into grooves, so it wouldn't show anyway, but it is a fantastic solution for cutting cross-grain plywood without getting any splintering by using that extra piece of tape.
Excellent tip right there. My shop, I am constantly mixing up epoxy. Sometimes it's the 5-minute version, or it could be the 30-minute option, or sometimes it's a 24-hour choice. But I always use a hard surface. I don't really like using cardboard. It's too absorbent. And so oftentimes I'll just use tape right on my workbench, or here I grabbed a scrap piece of plywood, add some clear packing tape, mix up the epoxy, glue up the job, and then peel the tape while the glue is still uncured. It's a super simple tip that works extremely well, and I never have to look for that just right object to mix the epoxy on. Here's a great one for you. So I'm needing to drill a hole straight in the edge of a panel, and can't really use a drill press, so I thought I'd make a quick and simple jig. Just using a square, I'm attaching a couple of blocks, and I'm sizing the space to the drill bit I'll be using. To start, I've dimmed the lights for a sexy atmosphere. Right. Got my laser going, so of course that'll ensure plumb in one direction. For the other direction, I'm starting by sizing my clamp, right? You can see I've drawn a couple of lines on this little jig. Just makes squaring the jig or template to the edge of the panel a little easier. Then I can use that same Brad point drill bit to ensure center, right? White piece of tape that designates center on my drill. Guides the drill in one way, and I can keep an eye on the laser in the other direction. And bam, just like that, I'm pretty accurate in both directions. Love it.
Now, I don't mind crude if it's effective. So here at my slider, I'm changing out the scoring blade. And this wrench, well, it's designed to make the adjustments for the scoring blade. And I just took this, whatever this is, 4 or 5 millimeter Allen key, put some welds on it to build it up, and then ground it back down so it would fit in this. This is magnetic. And I don't remember if I added that magnet or not, but because I don't know why it would need to be magnetic inside there for these adjustments. I might have added a magnet. Anyway, this slips in there, and with it I can use this same wrench to put my zero clearance insert back in place. So yeah, I love stuff like that. Double duty.
So maybe you already do this, I don't know, but I like making a little story stick. So here I'm cutting a bunch of dominoes. I want them all in the same place, of course. There's quite a few drawer boxes to do and 4 corners on every box. This just makes it quick and easy. When doing these exposed dominoes, not often, but occasionally I'll get a little bit of a chip out. The repair is simple. I just make a wedge. I just cut that by eye with a chisel. Of course, the cavity is created with the chisel as well. As you slip it in, it gets tighter and tighter, right? Add some glue, and the fix literally disappears. I'll show this entire process at some point in this same series. So there may be some controversy here, but since I've been doing this process, I cannot help but do it every time. And that is dampening these dominoes. 2 things. A, gets all the dust off, right? And 2, there's a phenomenon known as surface tension. So if you were to take a droplet of water and place it on a piece of wood or a domino, it's just going to sit there for a while, right? Until the moisture will finally start to wick in. Well, glue will do the same thing. Quite a while back, I had to tear something apart where I had put dominoes in the conventional way without adding moisture. And it came apart pretty easily, actually. And there was some areas of the domino that just seemed dry and not bonded. Well, after doing another test where I moistened the dominoes, I achieved a much better and stronger bond. So it makes sense to me. The absorption rate of the glue will be faster and better. And ultimately, yeah, you're going to get a much stronger glue bond. It'd be really cool for fine woodworking or somebody, maybe me, to do an actual official scientific test.
All right, you might find this comical. I find it effective. And so I made these not too long ago. I've been using them a lot. 4 layers of tape, 16.5 thou, 6 layers, 7 layers, 5 layers, 3 layers, 13.5 thou. Super effective. You know, I have feeler gauges, but feeler gauges are usually contained in a holder, and to use just one is sometimes awkward. But I use these all the time, setting up routers, panther router, table saw, here at the router table. Yep, very effective, very simple. I love solutions like that.
All right, that's it for this video. I will be sharing more of these quick tips. And remember, click like, subscribe, learn,